Sweet. So I'll start off by talking about ZK and Web2, emails, identities, and different kinds of data, and how you might be able to build a more user-centric internet. Vivek and Lily Jordan originally helped me make these slides and this talk. So what exactly does ZK provide compared to the current data paradigm? Currently, you have a bunch of data, and centralized systems take this data and profit off of it as they desire. But the hope is that if you can make ZK proofs about your own data, then you can cut out this middleman by verifiably sharing it with the parties who actually want to know about your data, only specific subsets of your data. You might be able to switch the way the internet works to instead be user-centric, where we can decide who we want to share the data with and how much we want to share. So what exactly does ZK need to work properly in this kind of context? Well, you need digital signatures fundamentally. Without signatures, users can't prove that their data was correct, and so you could technically forge anything. And so once we have more signatures on more data, we can make ZK proofs of those, and then ZK prove that we have a valid signature and reveal specific subsets of our identity or our data. Now, what benefits does ZK give us versus verifying the signature directly or trusting a centralized party? The idea is that users can now choose which platforms they want to provide this data to. If I have a bunch of ZK attestations about, say, information in my email or information in my passport, I can say, hey, I want to prove something about my passport and my email to this provider, but I don't want this other provider I don't trust as much to see that data. You can voice or exit, so you can choose which platforms you want to be on and don't want to be on, and you can revoke that access when you desire. And you can take back some of the control and the money that these platforms have profited off. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the different primitives that are generating these ZK proofs, and that's my little eye thing, and different types of signatures that are similar, that you might build with similar technology. And then I'll move to applications like proof of humanity and data guilds that allow us to reclaim some of that humanity. So for ZK email, what exactly is ZK email? Well, the idea is that every email you send or receive has an RSA signature of the data on it. So for instance, it'll be an RSA signature of the SHA-56 of the from address, the to address, the subject, and the hash of the body. If you send from, for instance, Gmail, then gmail.com will sign that email in order for it to leave your inbox, and then it'll get validated by the receiver before it shows up to make sure it's a legitimate email. But it turns out we can hijack this signature and prove it within a ZK proof with ZK email to validate the RSA signature and the SHA-56 of that email. Then we can use ZK regex to only reveal the specific data we want. This primitive is quite powerful because this means anybody with any set of emails can verify every single one of them themselves in the ZK proof, and then send it, if they want, to a blockchain or to another provider with only the data they want to reveal, for instance, just the from address. Now, you can verify things like maybe you're a contributor to a GitHub repo that helps you do retro PGF funding. What I would do is I would take this email from my inbox, I would prove it with ZK email, say I would only make public the fact that I've been invited to this repo, and then I can do, for instance, receive a contribution for people who contributed to that repo, thus creating a dependency tree for all GitHub repos and allowing people to give to their dependencies. You can also have different levels of anonymity. For instance, Nosy takes ZK email proofs and allows you to only verify the email domain. And the way you get an anonymity set out of this is actually quite subtle. So the way that other people often do JWT validation or OIDC validation is they take, say, your Google sign-in and they verify it in a ZK proof. The problem is, if you are running the Google sign-in provider, then Google knows everybody who's signing in, and you can see, hey, somebody signed in with Google right now, and then a post came 10 seconds later, it's probably the same person. And so if you want complete anonymity here, you have to use JWTs, not that you generate, but somebody else generates. So Nosy hijacks JWTs from existing services like ChatGPT with like hundreds of millions of users, which you can then verify within the ZK proof and ensure that nobody else knows exactly who you are, because there's no record of you ever signing into this website. You can also send money directly to email addresses. So once you've proved things about your identity, you can use that to create Web3 accounts. And then when you want those Web3 accounts to interact with the real world, you can send it to Web2 identities. And so this is entirely a user-friendly model in which both the data and the identities and the money moving around can happen entirely off-chain with UIs that are more friendly to existing users. We also, at ZK Summit, talked about account recovery and email login, which allows users to keep their assets safe by selecting different email addresses as their guardians instead of blockchain accounts. And this applies to any email in your inbox. So I can take, for instance, I'm just going to riff a bunch of emails I saw in my inbox this morning. I thought I took a flight, so I could potentially prove, hey, I took a carbon neutral friendly flight, or this is roughly my current location, although technically you could cancel the flight. It might still be useful in P2P cases. You can prove social media. For instance, I have this handle or I have this number of followers because you often get emails that reference that handle. You can prove you live in a certain place and do proxy voting. For instance, I can run a vote for who do the residents of California actually think the president should be. Proof of organization, like we saw with Nosy, for people to be more honest about criticism. Proof of credit score to enable lending. I mean, I'm just listing emails at this point, but like membership, if I got an email from someone inviting me to somewhere, I can talk about what I really think about it. Investors and companies can prove they got a term sheet between them, thus being able to talk about, hey, I had the term sheet from this investor, I verified that I have that, and I didn't like, or I did like how they did X or Y, and investors can do the similar thing for companies. You can prove you filed your tax return, you can file donations via email, and of course, ZK P2P, which was created at ZK Hack and also had a talk at ZK Summit, which uses ZK email to prove that they had, say, a Venmo email, and then use that to on-ramp and off-ramp money. So the idea is that we can take all the things we know and love about Web3, the different iterations we've had, and we can use these Web2 primitives instead to make that super user-friendly for people in the normal Web2 context. There's lots of other signatures, like there was RFC 2 months ago adding signatures to all HTTP requests. So hopefully if that gets adoption, then you can directly verify the HTTP from the source for websites that opt in, instead of having to trust like a notary. There's also other things that are signed outside of emails, including documents on DocuSign, Git commits, software packages, if you've done Coinbase KYC, and for instance, plumes, which are unique signatures of your Ethereum account. And this basically gives you a really holistic set of identity and data off-chain that you can then use on-chain. But what exactly can you do? We'll see some talks from Proof of Passport where they discuss how to do proof of humanity and KYC. You can also verify this via Gitcoin Passport that use verified N different documents because that data is on-chain. You can verify your KYC, for instance, from Airbnb, Coinbase, in your inbox. And finally, we also see a talk from Cursive, which allows you to prove that you've gone to a certain number of events or you've met a certain number of verified people, which is to bootstrap a network on top of in-chain interactions that you can use in the Web3 context. So how, in the end, do we use all of this to maybe reclaim our humanity? Now that we have all of these signatures, what can we actually build on top of it that we couldn't build before? Well, one answer to this is maybe data guilds. In the current model of advertising and data moving and money moving, users provide their data to a central party, say Facebook or Google, and advertisers pay them for that data at absurd rates, up to like $1 to $50 per user. You might imagine that if we sold our data directly to these advertisers, well, we could, for instance, get that money to ourselves, and then you could have big tech completely cut out because it would just be us discussing our verified data with the people who are willing to pay for it. But the problem is, in practice, this won't really work. The money we get probably won't be enough for us to care about it. If it's only $10 from a platform, people probably won't be incentivized to actually use this. And advertisers can still build a profile because as you send signatures to ZK Boots to them over time, they can still say, oh, this is the person who was verified here who has this data, and we're not actually adding privacy in any way. So how then do we combine these ZK-approved signatures information about ourselves and get the kind of freedom we want from these middle platforms? You can imagine a data guild. Imagine users grouped together in different heterogeneous groups, and then we're able to prove data within the guild directly to the advertisers. You could imagine this actually provides privacy for each user, because instead of each user saying, hey, I am this person, here's my data, now pay me for it, instead only aggregate interests are going to be served to the people who pay for the data. You could imagine that instead of selling the data directly, we only prove that the information was served correctly. So for instance, if the person paying for the data wants to update an ML model, we can update that model between us instead of directly giving the data and ask them to prove it. If they want to show some service and they say, hey, this is the interest vector, we can say, oh, our interest vector proven by this provenant data shows that you in fact served the ad to 16 relevant people. And only aggregate analytics are ever given back to advertisers, which ends up protecting each individual's privacy and data. You could do the ML training, or you could show the aggregate statistics. And in terms of the money, instead of $10 going to a single user in a way that they perhaps hardly care about that, you can have an aggregate instead collect, say, $100,000 that the community can then vote to spend on. And thus we can use the tooling we've built around DAOs and Web3 governance in a context in which it's entirely almost Web2. And people can then choose, hey, if we prove that we're part of this community and we act such that the money goes back to the community, then we can maybe build a bigger public good that serves everybody. And finally, it's permissionless. Users can move between guilds as they wish, if they like or don't like how the money is being spent, and you can compose it with all the experimentation we've already had in Web3. And so there's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot of different things you might imagine to change. For instance, how can we plug these Providence ZK systems into existing systems? Is there a trade-off between how homogeneous or how heterogeneous these groups are? And what if users have different privacy desires or guarantees? And so I'm excited to chat about ZKML stuff afterwards, or any of these data guild ideas, because we're still kind of thinking about the actual structure that such a platform might look like. But thank you, and I will hand it over to Passport.
Can we ask questions?
Yes.
Yeah, go for it. We'll maybe take a minute or two to go over questions. Yes, with their hand somewhere. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I see a lot of very interesting potential applications for that. And you discussed like many potential type of emails that you can receive and what you can potentially do with that. I know that ZKP exists and other things that you can log and stuff like that. I'm curious, what do you think some companies could be built from that? So we see a very good example with ZKP2B, but do you have other companies that were built, or do you have in your view that could be built with that technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, we talk about all this in the context of like public goods, but are there like companies that might be able to be built from these primitives? In my opinion, like, for instance, you could build the Data Guild thing directly as like a user-friendly platform, kind of like how you have other social media platforms like Farcast or Blue Sky. You can build something like that where you focus on ZKProof's identity. You can also do things like, for instance, I think different community-based ideas, I think especially the credit score and lending things, are super relevant to like businesses that actually want to make money off of it, because you're not making money directly off the attestation, you're making money off the people who really want the attestation to lend money to. And so it's kind of, I think there's like a ton of company opportunity because people are currently solving this with like very centralized parties, and so decentralizing that I think is extremely powerful. Sweet.
That's very good.
Oh, yeah.
Last thing, I'm just curious. I work on privacy preserving protocols,
Yeah.
so I'm really passionate about that. But the very big problem with privacy is that most people actually accept to give out privacy for comfort.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people don't really care about privacy. Unfortunately, I think that is something that we should change. But I'm actually curious in your context, where you're saying like, oh, we could build these guilds, with, we could not give all our data to advertisers, just do ZK proofs and prove that the data was good and stuff. I'm actually curious, how do you think we could change that? Because the advertisers are not incentivized to do that, right? They have built this infrastructure where they can gather all this data because it makes them fuck ton of money. So why would they be incentivized to change that and to accept to use some other type of systems like ZK that would not enable them to make potentially as much money?
Yeah, it's a good point. I guess like why would advertisers opt into a system like this? I think there's maybe like two reasons. So one is that like it's not just the privacy that users get, it's also like verifiability, which means that if you're not selling to advertisers, there's still benefit to like verifying this data in ZK. And then two, for why advertisers would adopt this, I think there's two reasons. One is that it offloads some of the compute from their side onto clients, and so they can say, hey, I have this model. I don't want to run the training step for every single user because that might be expensive. But I can send the model, or like a FHE encrypted version of the model, to a user. They can update it and just send back if we did it correctly. And now I'm punting that computation to the client. And the client is happy because they get privacy in return for doing the computation. And so there might actually be benefits on both sides, but it's kind of still yet to see like what exactly benefits are there. Yeah, but it's a good question. Sweet, I'll hand it over to Remy.